My wife came home wearing her boss's cologne, so I walked into his company party beside his wife. She's remarkable, I told him, and his confident smile disappeared. She came home that Thursday night wearing his cologne. I do not mean that as a figure of speech. I was standing at the kitchen island in our Upper West Side apartment, cutting a lemon for the sparkling water I had poured after a 12-hour day, when Meredith walked through the door and kissed my cheek the way she had for 9 years. The scent reached me immediately. It was not mine. It was woody, dark, and expensive, the kind of fragrance a man wears when he wants the world to believe he makes important decisions. I said nothing. I handed her the glass and asked how the client dinner had gone. Fine, she said. Long. Then she headed toward the bedroom without looking back. I stayed in the kitchen for 4 more minutes, finishing my water and thinking about that smell. I thought about how specific it was. I thought about the fact that Meredith worked for Fletcher Holt, Senior Vice President of Business Development at Lincroft Capital, a private equity firm in Midtown Manhattan. And I thought about the 2 company events where I had encountered that exact fragrance on Fletcher himself. The first time, it had meant nothing. The second time, in my own kitchen on a Thursday night in October, it meant everything. My name is Sebastian Vance. I was 45 years old and the managing director of operations for a mid-sized logistics company with offices in New York, Chicago, and Atlanta. I had spent 20 years building systems, carefully, methodically, one load-bearing piece at a time. I did not react before I understood. I assessed, and while the city moved 14 floors below us and my wife showered for the second time that day, I began assessing the full weight of the structure I was standing on and whether any part of it could still hold. I had met Meredith 11 years earlier at a fundraiser in Tribeca. She was 31, already a senior analyst at Lincroft, and impossible not to notice. She was sharp, organized, and able to remember a person's name after hearing it once. We dated for 2 years before marrying, long enough for me to understand the woman I was choosing. She was ambitious and exacting, with a dry, understated sense of humor that appeared only when she knew the moment could carry it. I loved that about her. We never had children. In the 3rd year of our marriage, we made that decision together quietly and without resentment because neither of us could picture parenthood fitting the lives we had chosen. We had a good apartment, 2 successful careers, a cabin in the Catskills we used perhaps 5 weekends a year, and enough shared history that strangers thought our marriage looked effortless. For a long time it did. The first sign of change appeared in the spring, roughly 8 months before that October night. Meredith began working later, not dramatically and not all at once. It was a gradual drift, like a ship moving a few degrees off course, until the horizon no longer looks familiar. Dinner at 7 became dinner at 8. 8 became 9. Soon there were evenings when I ate alone, and she called from the office at 9:30 to say she was finally leaving. I knew what demanding work looked like, but I began paying attention systematically and quietly. The joint credit card statements gave me the first measurable pattern. Lincroft had a generous expense policy, yet small personal restaurant charges began appearing through spring and summer. A wine bar on 48th Street, a small bistro on the far west side of Chelsea. Intimate places that would not appear on a corporate expense report because the meetings were not corporate. Her phone became the second pattern. It had once remained in plain sight. Now it stayed in her pocket, lay face down on the nightstand, and followed her into the bathroom while she showered. I noticed routine changes the way a mechanic hears a new sound. I still did not confront her. Confronting someone before you possess the full picture gives them information. It reveals what you know and lets them rebuild their story around your evidence. 20 years in operations had taught me never to signal my position before securing it. So I watched. I waited. I recorded what mattered. The third pattern was Fletcher Holt himself. I had met him 4 times at Lincroft events. He was 48, silver-haired, and carried the kind of presence that filled a room without requiring volume. He behaved as though every room had been constructed with him in mind. He came from money, had attended Yale, and carried the confidence of a man who had gone too long without meaningful consequences. His wife Diane was 44. She had once been an architect, then left her firm 6 years earlier and moved into design consulting and charity work. I had spoken with her at length only once, at a Lincroft holiday party 3 years before. She had been gracious, perceptive, and far more observant than the conversation required. At the time, I had no idea how important Diane Holt would become to the next phase of my life. That October night after Meredith had showered, she fell asleep at 10:15, earlier than usual, her body arranged with the loose stillness of someone relieved that a performance was over. I lay beside her and stared at the ceiling. Before dawn, I made one decision. I would know everything before I did anything. The next morning, I called my college roommate, Owen Garrett. Owen had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant before opening a firm that specialized in what he politely called asset verification. He could locate a hidden bank account the way most people found their car keys. We had remained close after seeing each other at our worst when we were young. "Sebastian," he said when he picked up, "it is 7 in the morning. I know. I need you to look into someone. It is personal." He paused, recalibrating. "How personal?" "My wife," I said, "and a man named Fletcher Holt." He was silent for a moment, then his professional voice took over. "I need everything you have on Holt and access to whatever financial records you can legally give me." I spent the next half hour on the roof terrace of our building, sending Owen the information he requested: Lincroft Capital, Fletcher's title, every piece of public information I knew, and a clean summary of the changes I had observed over the previous 8 months. I formatted it like a project brief. Then I went downstairs, made coffee, and prepared for a 7:30 call with our Chicago office. When your private world begins to collapse, you keep everything else moving, while you identify which supports have failed. Owen called 10 days later on a Saturday afternoon. Meredith was attending a yoga class she had recently joined on the East 80s, a 40-minute subway ride from our apartment, despite there being 3 excellent studios within walking distance. "You sitting down?" Owen asked. "I am at my desk." "Good, this is thorough." He said the affair had likely been going on for about 7 months. The yoga class was real. The rest of the cover was not. Fletcher had a history of what Owen charitably called extended professional relationships with women in his reporting chain. Meredith was not the first. At least one previous situation at Lincroft had ended in a quiet internal transfer and a non-disclosure payment routed through a consulting company Fletcher controlled under a name that sounded like a landscape architecture firm. 7 months, I repeated. Approximately. That is what the charge patterns and phone records support. The hotel stays began in March. I can identify 3. The most recent was 2 weeks ago. I let the information settle. I pictured the cologne, the second shower, and the relief in Meredith's sleeping posture. "What about his wife?" I asked. "Diane? You mean what she knows? What does she know, and what does her life look like?" That is an interesting question. It is the relevant one. Diane had a design consulting practice incorporated in Delaware that produced modest but steady income. She kept personal accounts separate from Fletcher's. 3 years earlier, she had sold property in Connecticut, inherited from her father, and the proceeds remained in an account Fletcher could not access. Her financial activities showed that for at least 2 years, she had been building independence with the quiet discipline of someone preparing for a future she had not yet announced. "She already knows," Owen said, "or she suspects enough to prepare as though she knows." After the call, I looked toward late October Central Park. Bare branches stood exposed beneath a gray sky. My emotions wanted a confrontation that would satisfy me for 4 minutes and damage us for years. Precision meant recognizing that the situation required something quieter. Lincroft Capital held its annual partner and client reception every December at the Four Seasons on East 57th Street. I had attended with Meredith 4 times. It was the sort of event where wealth tried to look relaxed and failed 300 people networking aggressively while pretending to enjoy themselves. That year, I planned to attend prepared. During the 6 weeks between Owen's call and the reception, I took several steps. First, I retained David Park, a Park Avenue family law attorney who had spent 2 decades handling high-asset divorces for clients who needed someone meticulous and unflappable. I explained the situation. He did not react with surprise or moral outrage. He asked questions, took notes, and gave me a list of what he needed and when he needed it. Second, I contacted Diane Holt. I did not call or email. I wrote a note by hand on plain cream stationery and sent it to a co-working address Owen had identified, a place Diane used 3 days a week for her consulting practice. The note said, "I believe we are dealing with the same situation. If you would like to have coffee, I am at the number below. Sebastian Vance." She called 4 days later. We met at a small coffee shop on Lexington Avenue, the kind that had existed for 30 years without needing a social media presence. It attracted people who valued privacy and quiet. Diane looked exactly as I remembered her from the holiday party. She had the disciplined composure of someone who had managed a painful truth for too long. She had decided what the meeting was and arrived prepared. "Mr. Vance," she said, as she sat across from me, already holding her coffee. "Sebastian, please." She studied me with the measuring gaze of an architect inspecting a site before placing a single line on paper. "How long have you known I have had evidence for 6 weeks? I believe it has been happening for about 7 months. She paused. "Closer to a year, on this one." Her eyes shifted slightly at my wording. "Yes, on this one. There was another woman before Meredith, 2 years ago. That is when I began preparing." I heard something in her voice I recognized from my own experience. It was not anger. She had moved beyond anger and arrived somewhere cleaner where facts mattered more than outrage. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. I told her about the December reception. I explained the outline, the timing, and the purpose. As she listened, I watched her reach the same conclusion I had. After about 4 minutes, she placed her cup on the table. "I will be there." "Good," I said. "Dress like someone who owns the room." She almost smiled. "I always do." Until then, I continued living normally. I woke each morning, made coffee, went to work, came home, ate dinner with Meredith, and behaved in every visible respect like a man who did not know his marriage had become a performance, playing on an empty stage. Some people would have found that impossible. I found it clarifying. Once a problem has been measured and the response decided, waiting can become peaceful, like the moment before pouring a foundation, when every calculation is complete. Meredith performed well too. She showed affection at the proper moments, remained attentive over dinner, and kept enough consistency in her routine that a less observant husband might have noticed nothing. As I watched her, I felt something I had not expected. Sadness. Not for myself, at least not yet. I felt sad for the woman who had walked into that Tribeca fundraiser 11 years earlier with genuine sharpness and a real laugh, and who had somehow become a person choosing this. Whatever Fletcher offered her, I could not imagine it being worth the cost. I would not explain that. Experience would. 3 weeks before the reception, David Park called with a full legal assessment. I had documented the credit card patterns, hotel records, Owen's report, and a timeline built from Meredith's behavior. David said it was one of the most organized evidence packages he had received from a client, which he intended as praise, and which I accepted that way. We spent 90 minutes reviewing timing, filings, and financial structure. By the end of the call, I knew exactly what would be filed, when it would be filed, and what Meredith would discover the morning after the reception. December arrived in New York with biting cold, compensating lights, and the city's yearly rush toward the end of something. On the morning of the event, I went to the office early, cleared my most urgent work, and spent an hour on quiet administrative tasks. Order calmed me. I had a dark charcoal suit made for the evening because I wanted to enter as the version of myself I had spent 20 years building. It did not announce its quality, but men who understood restraint would recognize it. I arrived at the Four Seasons at 7:15, before most guests, but not conspicuously early. The ballroom glowed with restrained opulence, warm, low lighting, flowers that probably cost as much as a used car, and waitstaff moving with trained invisibility. I took a position near the bar, ordered sparkling water, and waited. Diane arrived at 7:30. I had told her to come separately and she had understood without explanation. She wore a deep green dress that conveyed exactly what I had suggested, a woman who did not need the room's approval because she had already assessed the room and found it slightly beneath her standards. She moved with the composure I had come to admire. She found me without appearing to search. She walked to the bar, ordered champagne, and stood at a comfortable distance as though we had simply happened to occupy the same space. "Well," she said quietly, lifting her glass toward the light as if studying its color. "You look excellent." "So do you." She paused. "Is she here?" "Not yet. He usually comes early to work the room. She follows about 15 minutes later. It is a pattern." "You have noticed his patterns." "I notice most things." She turned slightly toward me. "That must have been exhausting, being married to someone who was not watching back." I considered it. It was. At 7:43, Fletcher Holt entered. He carried the unmistakable energy of a man returning to his natural habitat. He surveyed the room with practiced warmth, knowing exactly whom to greet, when to laugh, and how long to remain in each conversation. His silver hair was perfect, his posture easy, his navy suit expensive without being adventurous. From 6 feet away, I caught the faint trace of his fragrance, the scent from my kitchen. He moved through the crowd, with a handshake here and a remembered name there. His eyes kept sweeping the room, searching for one particular face. At 7:58, Meredith arrived. She wore a red dress I had never seen. Her hair had been professionally done. She looked beautiful in the distinct way people look when they are excited by what they are doing, illuminated from within rather than by the room. Within 15 seconds, she located Fletcher. Then she deliberately looked elsewhere, the controlled movement of someone concealing a direction already chosen. Her gaze found me next. Her smile was genuine and practiced in equal measure. I held that smile in my mind for a moment, the way a person holds an object before deciding where to place it. I turned to Diane. She set down her champagne. Completely. We crossed the ballroom together. From the way people followed us with their eyes, I understood that Diane and I made an objectively interesting pair in a room filled with Lincroft employees, partners, and clients. We were not dramatic. We were simply two people moving with purpose, and purposeful movement draws attention, even when no announcement is made. Near the center of the ballroom, Fletcher stood with two partners from the Boston office. His back was toward us. He was laughing at something one of them had said. I had the particular pleasure of watching the moment the man facing him noticed us. Fletcher saw the change in the man's expression, followed his gaze, and turned. He saw Diane first. Then he saw me. Finally, he registered Diane standing beside me, with the relaxed certainty of a woman who had chosen her position deliberately. Fletcher had built a career managing uncertainty and talking through awkward situations. I watched that skill arrive in his face, then meet a situation created entirely by someone else. "Diane," he said, "I did not know you were coming tonight." She smiled. "I have always loved this event, you know that." The silence lasted under 3 seconds but contained an entire conversation. Then Meredith appeared at my shoulder. After 9 years of marriage, I sensed her before I turned a small change in the air beside me. She had been moving toward Fletcher's group and had arrived at a scene for which she possessed no script. "Seb?" she said, her voice perfectly measured. "Hi." She kissed my cheek. It was the correct social move and, under the circumstances, an impressive one. I put my arm around her waist. "You look incredible," I said. "I want you to meet someone properly. Meredith, this is Diane Holt. I do not believe you two have ever been formally introduced." Meredith faced her. Her professionalism was extraordinary. "Hi," she said. "Of course, Fletcher talks about you all the time." Diane smiled. "That is interesting. He does not mention you much at home." The temperature inside the small circle seemed to drop. The Boston partners discovered urgent reasons to look elsewhere. Fletcher's jaw tightened in a small, involuntary movement he probably did not know he had made. "I am sorry," Meredith said, although she had heard every word. Diane looked at her with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of a woman who had spent nearly a year preparing to close a door. "I think we both know what I mean." Her voice remained low and even. It carried the authority of someone no longer performing. Then she looked at Fletcher. Something passed across her face that I can only describe as finality. It was not anger or triumph. It was the expression of a person closing a door she had known for a long time she would eventually close. She turned back to me. "Sebastian, it was wonderful to run into you. I will be in touch about the documents." Then she walked away, with the unhurried grace of a woman who had already moved somewhere better before crossing the room. Meredith stood rigid beside me. Fletcher's face moved from confusion to the precise humiliation of a man who knew he had been outmaneuvered but could not identify when the maneuver had begun. I took my arm from Meredith's waist and looked at him. "She is remarkable, is she not?" I said. "Your wife." His expression shifted. He understood that Meredith's quiet, operations director husband was not the harmless figure he had imagined. Then I looked at Meredith. Whatever remained of my love for the woman she had once been, I placed down in that moment as carefully as I had set down a glass at the bar. "I hope the client dinner was worth it," I said. Then I walked away. The divorce papers were served the next morning. Meredith found them on the kitchen counter when she came out of the bedroom. I had left the apartment at 6:15 before she woke, exactly as I had left for work for 9 years. I had no interest in a dramatic presentation. I preferred clear, legible information delivered in a format that required no interpretation. David Park's office had prepared everything with the thoroughness I expected. The filing was clean, the evidence organized and labeled. 6 weeks of work with my accountant protected what I had built before the marriage and clarified what came next. I was at my desk by 7:30 when Meredith called. I let the first call go to voicemail. She called 3 more times that morning. I answered the 4th because I had completed the work that needed my attention first. "Seb," she said. She had been crying. I had expected that. "Please tell me what is happening. You have the documents. They explain it clearly. I need to talk to you. I need you to explain last night. Who was that woman to you? What is happening?" I listened and chose the most accurate answer. Last night was the first time I had ever had a conversation of any length with Diane Holt. I contacted her because she deserved to know what was happening in her marriage just as I deserved to know what was happening in mine. The documents are self-explanatory. David Park's number is on the cover page. "Seb, this is not you. This is not how you handle things. It is exactly how I handle things. You simply did not know it." She went quiet. Then she asked the question I have remembered most clearly. "How long did you know? 8 months, give or take." 8 months, she repeated slowly, understanding the size of that answer. I want to be precise about something I said because precision matters. At any point during those 8 months, you could have told me the marriage was not working. You could have said you wanted something different or said anything else that was true. I would have listened. I would have handled it. That is what 20 years of doing difficult things carefully looks like. She said nothing. You chose not to tell me. That is information too. I heard her exhale as though something heavy had finally been named after being carried too long. "I am sorry. I know. Have your attorney contact David's office when you are ready to proceed." Then I returned to work. What happened to Fletcher over the following months unfolded the way consequences often unfold when a person has spent years assuming no one around him is paying close attention. Diane was far more prepared than anyone in her life had believed. She retained a divorce attorney known to be considerably more aggressive than David. During the next 90 days of financial discovery, a picture emerged that I suspected Diane had quietly helped assemble for years. Her records were orderly, the assets were documented, and her personal financial position was much stronger than Fletcher's advisors had expected. Some of that information came through Owen, who remained involved as a professional courtesy. The rest traveled through the particular network that exists in professional New York, through corporate law firms' finance offices, and quiet dinners where people repeat things they claim will not leave the table. Diane herself did not call me. 3 weeks after the reception, she sent a single text. "The documents I mentioned are filed. I hope you are well." I replied that I hoped the same for her. That was the full extent of our contact, because that was all our relationship had ever been. A practical alliance between two people handed the same situation who chose to handle it together. I respected her for maintaining that boundary. I hoped she found something worthwhile beyond it. The reception had not been the controlled environment Fletcher was accustomed to mastering. Whatever version of the affair he had constructed in his own mind collided with the damage of a scene witnessed by 60 or 70 colleagues, clients, and partners. Scenes like that do not require detailed explanation. The Boston partners who had tactfully moved away were still witnesses. By Monday morning, the general shape of the incident was understood. By Wednesday, it had been translated into every relevant corridor of the firm. I heard that Fletcher took an extended leave of absence in January. I heard that several things changed at Lincroft during the months that followed, the way things change when a senior executive's private conduct becomes a public internal story. I did not take simple pleasure in it. I observed it as accurate information. In engineering, there is a stress test. Pressure is applied to a structure so the weak points reveal themselves. Fletcher's structure had been failing for years. He had merely operated in an environment where no one had tested it properly. I applied pressure. The results belonged to the structure. By March, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Midtown East. I had rented it years before I could afford anything better and kept it throughout the marriage, as office space and occasionally a place to think. From the bathroom window, I could see the Chrysler Building. Meredith had always considered the apartment eccentric. I had always found it clarifying. I furnished it simply and well. Some mornings I worked there when I did not need to be at the office. I made coffee exactly the way I liked it without adjusting for another person. I ate when I was hungry, rather than according to a shared schedule. I went to bed when I felt tired. They sound like small freedoms. After years of negotiating domestic life around another person's preferences, they were not. The friends who knew me best all said some version of the same thing. You seem lighter. They meant the burden had been heavier than I let them see. In April, I had lunch with Owen, at the same corner table in a restaurant we had visited for 15 years. One of those places that never changes because the owner sees no reason to alter what works. We ate pasta and discussed his children, my apartment, and the absurdity of beginning a new chapter in New York in your mid-40s. She was lucky, Owen said, that you are the kind of man who handles things the way you do. I thought about the kitchen and October Fletcher's cologne, the lemon water, and the 4 silent minutes. I do not know whether lucky is the right word. What is the right word? I considered it. Protected, I said. She was protected from the version of this that could have been worse. I did not do that for her intentionally. It is simply how I am built. Owen nodded, ordered another coffee, and changed the subject. There is one more part of the story, and because I began by promising precision, I will end with it. About 6 weeks after the December reception, a card arrived at my apartment rather than my office. It was plain cream, the same kind of stationery I had used when writing to Diane. Inside, in handwriting I recognized, were the words, "Thank you for the coffee and for treating me like someone worth telling the truth to." I set the card on my desk and sat with the meaning of it. When the information inside your home does not match reality, you learn to construct truth from evidence. It creates a deep appreciation for directness and for being treated as someone capable of surviving the truth. During that entire ordeal, Diane had been treated that way by one person, and she had sent a card to acknowledge it. I wrote back, "So were you. Good luck with whatever comes next." That was the last I heard from her, and it was the correct amount. My divorce was finalized in May. David handled it with the precision for which I had hired him. The settlement was fair and clean. Meredith and I never met in person after the reception because nothing required it, and physical presence rarely improves situations once every necessary truth has already been established. She kept the Upper West Side apartment. I kept the cabin in the Catskills, and the financial arrangements that predated our marriage arrangements, she had never fully mapped until discovery required it. David later told me her attorney had been surprised by their scope. Most people do not keep that much separate, he said. I spent 20 years in operations. I understand the importance of load-bearing structures that do not depend on a single point of failure. He laughed. It was probably a better strategy than most. Probably. The weekend after the divorce became final, I drove to the cabin. I arrived on Friday evening during the particular kind of Catskills rain that makes the mountains sound as though they are clearing their throat. I sat on the porch with tea and watched the weather move across the ridge. What I felt was not happiness about what had happened. It was gratitude for what the process had revealed. I had learned that I did not panic. I gathered information before moving. I knew the difference between a reaction and a response, and even when every instinct demanded the first, I was capable of choosing the second. I had learned that Diane Holt was exceptionally composed, that she had endured a worse version of the same situation for longer than I had, and that she handled it with more grace than most people could manage under easier circumstances. I had learned that Fletcher Holt was exactly what sustained attention revealed him to be. A man who confused not being caught with not being seen. Those are not the same thing. I had never confused them, and I had learned that Meredith, beneath the performance of those final months, was still someone I had once genuinely known. At some point, for reasons she would have to understand on her own, she decided that being known mattered less than being excited. I did not hate her for that choice. I simply refused to finance it. The rain stopped around 9. The sky cleared with the sudden completeness that sometimes follows a mountain storm, as though the weather itself had decided to move on. I remained on the porch for another hour, listening to the quiet and looking at the trees while I considered what I would build next. Because after you assess the damage and clear the site, that is what you do. You build again, carefully and precisely, one load-bearing piece at a time. And before you pour the next foundation, you make certain you understand exactly what you are standing on.